Hi, I'm Tim from Vintage and Classic, and today it's a Sunday, beautiful sunny morning, a week today on the 3rd of November, so we're on the Sunday before that. We're going to be doing the London to Brighton run in our 1904 Humberette. Now, I thought this was a fantastic opportunity to come down and show you the car when no one's around, and talk through the systems and the controls and just how it works really. It's a single cylinder, 6.5 horsepower car, and it runs backwards, the engine, anti-clockwise, which is unusual. We have 2 gear levers, no throttle pedal as such. There's actually a pedal for the clutch and a pedal for the brake, and we control the revolutions of the engine by 2 levers at the bottom of the steering column, just under the steering wheel. So I'm going to show you all of that. We're going to take it for a little drive. There's a few people around this morning. It's okay, it's just always the same when you think it's quiet and it's not. Anyway, so just bear with me. I'm just going to waffle a bit really, and just hopefully you'll get an idea about the car. Now, this car we've had in our family since 1982, and my mum has done thousands of miles in this car, and we've done the Brighton run every year since then, and there's only been 3 occasions when we haven't actually got down to Brighton in that time. I've driven the car more times than I've forgotten how many, to be honest, well over 30 times. And we're going to be doing it next Sunday. So we're going to also do some footage next Sunday of the run and what that involves. And this is really just some of the preparation. Now, this morning I pumped the tyres up. That's very important. They're beaded edge tyres, and they actually run at 65 psi, which is an awful lot. If they didn't run at that, they'd literally fall off the rims. And they have an inner tube inside, and the tyres are essentially motorcycle tyres on wooden rims. The rims are made of ash. The actual wheels themselves are made of ash, the timber ash, and it has a metal ring which is shrunk by a wheelwright onto it, heated up and then shrunk. And they're made in exactly the same way as cartwheels would have been made for centuries. And that's a dying art. There's only, as far as we know, a couple of people left that can actually do that work. And one of them this gentleman rebuilt the wheels back in the 1980s. He was at that time the apprentice. And now he's the guy that's taken over the business, and they're just dying out, these people. So what we're going to do, I do not know. But he also recently rebuilt the wheels on our 1914 Sunbeam, and we're going to do a feature on that as well. So please, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, keep watching, and we'll go through it and we'll take it for a little drive. So to start with, I'm going to show you the engine. Now, as I mentioned, it's 6.5 horsepower. It's a single cylinder engine. It's got less power than my lawnmower at home, but come and have a look. So we have a little Zenith carburettor at the bottom here that produces enough fuel for the inlet and the exhaust, which it has an inlet and an exhaust valve, as you'd expect. It has obviously a single spark plug, and it has something called a trembler coil. So rather than having traditional ignition, it has something called a trembler coil, which produces a spark. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I can see people are going to start falling asleep. Probably my cameraman to start with. So we're going to get the car going. First thing we need to do is pull some petrol up. So there's a petrol tank situated just behind the bonnet and the scuttle in the car itself. There's petrol on this side and oil on that side, and I'll come to the oil in a minute. There's a tap at the bottom, so I'm just going to turn that on. Back in the day in 1904, you didn't have petrol stations, so you'd actually buy your petrol from the local chemist. You'd have to order it and collect it, and it's all a bit of a faff. But then again, owning a car back then was probably like owning a helicopter today, so it was a very special thing to have. And this car is a sort of cycle car, they call it really. It's a Humberette. It's made by the Humber Motor Company. They made 2 versions of this car, the Coventry version and the Beeston version. The Beeston version was the like the upmarket, if you like, the Bandon Pla or the Gear, whatever you like to call it. This is one of those. It's a Beeston model, so it has a little bit more brass and a little bit more technology, and I think it's a half a horsepower bigger, but I'm not absolutely certain about that. Anyway, I'm going to pull the fuel up now. We pull that till it just floods out of the carburettor. Okay, I'm just going to turn the engine over now. I mentioned it actually runs backwards. You can see I'm actually turning it over that way instead of that way. And that starting handle we had to remake a couple of years ago because unfortunately the starting handle, which was original to the car, just fell off. Somewhere between Crawley and Brighton. So if anyone's watching this and they found a starting handle, it might be ours. We'd love to have it back. So somebody's probably turned it into a lamp or something anyway. So that's the petrol up. The next thing we need to do, I'll come around the other side, is the oil. Now, I mentioned that we have an oil reservoir, oil tank here. So it's almost like a dry sump engine, which you have on a race car, say. But what it is, it has a total loss oil system. So you put oil in the top of the engine and it falls out the bottom. So we go down to Brighton on about a gallon of petrol, and I'm sad to say about a gallon of oil as well. So we're going to turn the tap on, push a squirt of oil in just to get the car started, and about every 20 minutes I will turn the tap on and put another squirt of oil in to keep the engine lubricated, so it doesn't have a sump in the traditional sense. The next important thing is the ignition settings. So as I mentioned to you, we don't have a throttle pedal, but we have two levers. Now they're on the top of the steering column. That is the throttle opening and closing, but it also has on the other side an ignition advance and retard. Now, we don't want the ignition too far advanced when we start it, because that's when it could backfire and it can do a lot of damage, and I don't fancy a trip to A&E today. So I'm going to start off with it ever so slightly advanced, mainly retarded. We've altered the settings of ignition on this car. We had a problem last year with ignition. We did get to Brighton, but quite late in the day. And over the last year, we've been gradually rebuilding the ignition system. And in the end, we stripped it right back to basics and took all the settings off and redid it. We measured the top dead center, we measured the flywheel and all the stroke and bore, and we've come up with a fresh set of settings. So I'm not as familiar, so I don't want to have any accidents. So if it doesn't start first time, bear with me. We're going to turn it on. That's a click there. So there's a battery under the seat, 6-volt battery. That's connected through the ignition system via to the trembler coil, which I mentioned, which is this thing here, and that produces a spark. And there is, if you like, almost like a set of points, but it's called a wipe. And what that does is it rotates on a shaft which is at the bottom of the engine and tells the spark plug and the trembler coil effectively when to fire to produce a spark. So hopefully this is all lined up properly, and we'll have a little go and see if it starts. So bear with me. Now, oh, that's nearly. There we go. So we always say, well done, Annabelle. So that's her name. I'll speak up a little bit because the engine's now. So she's firing away. And there we are. 6.5 horsepower, which will propel us down to Brighton at a top speed of about 28 miles an hour. So how cool is that? And we'll actually get down to Brighton on about a gallon of fuel, and that's 60 miles to the gallon, so this will be quite economical. Right, let's get on board and go for a ride. Okay. Now, there's an interesting story about my mum when she was driving this car and our now King Charles III, when he was Prince of Wales. So the Prince of Wales feathers that we showed you there on the dashboard, they're there for a reason. Now, Mum was on a rally near Highgrove, I think, where Charles would have been living then, and she was lost, and she was driving down a single track road, and either side there were stubble fields. You know, they've just harvested the wheat, and there was a car coming towards her, which was a beautiful drop-head Aston Martin from the 1960s. Now, you've probably seen that kind of car because it's been popularised in the Crown recently. You can see that was a car that Charles had and has always owned. And that was coming towards Mum, and she didn't know who it was. And there was no way she was driving this car into the stubble field. So there was this Mexican standoff between the Aston Martin and Mum, and she didn't see who was driving it. And eventually he buckled and he drove around the car on the ploughed, on the field, and turned around, wound the window down and turned around to Mum and said, "I'm most impressed." So there we go, that's the story. So in honour of that, the guy that was looking after the car at the time fret cut this lovely Prince of Wales feathers. So that's that story. So there is an amazing amount of fun to be had with old cars. I think that's the thing. They produce memories and they produce stories like that. And when we do our prize draws and we're giving away cars, that's really what it's all about. It's about nostalgia, it's about memory, it's about living history and enjoying these vehicles. And as a family business, we're passionate about making that ownership as accessible as possible to the community that we've built up. And we really are genuine about that. So we would love to see more people joining our rewards club, for example, which is a no-brainer, and engaging in some of the competitions and the prize draws we do, many of which, when you join that, are all free. We don't charge for those. So anyway, I digress. So yes, that's the story about Mum and the now king running him off the road.